For section 1.6, we're looking at rationalizing the denominator. Now, a surd like root 3 is an irrational number, and so I cannot divide by an irrational number. And therefore, I have to rationalize it. I have to turn it into a rational number. And I do that by multiplying the fraction by the surd. So root 3 times root 3, and I also multiply the numerator by root 3 as well. Whatever I do to the denominator, I do to the numerator, because what I want is to get an equivalent fraction. So 1 times root 3 is root 3, and root 3 times root 3 is simply 3. Now I have a fraction where the denominator is rational. That's the most important thing, that the denominator is rational, and therefore I can divide by 3 should I wish. But that's the answer. It's root 3 over 3. Now it gets a little bit more complicated when you have the denominator has a surd, root 2, but it also has a number that is added or subtracted to the surd. For something like this, you treat this denominator as if it were a bracket, and you're going to multiply the denominator by a similar bracket, but with an opposite sign. So if you have a plus there, you're going to multiply by the same numbers, but you're going to change it to a minus. And of course, whatever you do to the denominator, you've multiplied by that bracket, you do to the numerator. So I'm multiplying the 1 by 3 minus root 2, and it gives me 3 minus root 2. Now, what happens at the bottom? Well, let's have a look. You've got 3 times 3 is 9. Plus root 2 take away or multiplied by a negative root 2 is a negative 2. And then look at what happens here. That's a positive 3 root 2. And that multiplication is a negative 3 root 2. So they cancel out. In fact, I wouldn't even bother doing that. I would simply multiply the 3 by the 3 to get 9, the root 2 by negative root 2 to get negative 2, and your fraction is going to look like this. 3 minus root 2 over 9 minus 2, which is 7. And that's your final answer. You've rationalized the denominator. The denominator is no longer a surd, but a whole number. This one is the same. I've got 2 roots and a minus, so I treat it like a bracket, and I multiply it by root 5 plus root 2, and I multiply the top by exactly the same thing, root 5 plus root 2. The bottom is actually the easier one, because the negative here and the positive here will cancel the roots out. So I'm going to have root 5 times root 5, which is 5. Then root 2 times negative, that's a plus. So negative root 2 times a positive root 2 is a negative 2, and that's going to simplify to a 3. But the bottom has the same sign. So it's going to be a much more complex multiplication than that. I'm still going to have root 5 times root 5. So I'm still going to have the 5. I'm going to still have the plus root 2 times a plus root 2 times a positive root 2. So that's a plus 2. But I'm going to have a root 2 times root 5, which is root 10. And adding another root 5 times root 2, which is another root 10, which is 2 root 10. And you can check with a calculator whether 2 root 10 simplifies. It doesn't. It's still 2 root 10. So I've got plus 2 root 10, and I've got like terms here, 2 add 5. So I've got a 7 plus 2 root 10. That's your final answer. That's your final fraction. And the final question is 1 over 1 minus root 3 squared. Well, 1 minus root 3 squared is 1 minus root 3 times 1 minus root 3. So 1 times 1 is 1. Negative root 3 times 1 is negative root 3. Negative root 3 times 1 is negative root 3. And then a negative root 3 times a negative root 3 is a plus 3. I've got like terms here, and I've got like terms there. So the final answer is 4, 1 plus 3, and then minus 2 root 3. So this is really 1 over 4 minus 2 root 3. And that's where I start rationalizing the denominator. That's my bracket. I multiply it by a very similar bracket, but instead of a minus, I put a plus. And I multiply the numerator by exactly the same thing to keep the fraction equivalent. So the top, 4 plus 2 root 3. And at the bottom, I've got 4 times 4, which is 16. And I've got negative 2. I can actually put that into the calculator. So I can put negative 2 root 3, use the arrows, times a positive 2 root 3. Use the arrows, close your bracket, minus 12. So that's going to give us 4 plus 2 root 3 over 16 minus 12 is 4. Now, I hope you note that 4, 2, and 4 are all divisible by 2. And so you can simplify this fraction further. I wonder if the new calculators would simplify it for us. Always check, but let's see if it does. I think it might. Yes, it does. Now, the best thing to do is always remember, for many of these things, your buzzword at the end of a question is to factorize. So I'm going to factorize the top. 2 is the highest common factor. 2 times 2 makes 4, plus root 3 divided by 4. 2 divided by 4 is a half. This gives me a 1. This gives me a 2. So my final answer is 2 plus root 3 over 2, which is exactly the answer that I got when I used the calculator. But always check whether you have simplified your fraction fully.